Oh, this is Final Fantasy 4 stuff.
Envy is a hell of a thing. It's something everyone can relate to, and yet it has the potential to do such incredible harm. It's a feeling that can eat away at you from the inside, turn your
I don't know why I
best,
said Final
most
Fantasy 4.
positive
Oh,
relationships
sorry.
into your most harmful and toxic. And at times, it can be something seemingly impossible to cope with. Envy can change a person. There are countless stories out there about people who've been warped by it, and the story I'm about to talk about is one of them. The story of three friends and a rift forming between them, of a great man brought down by the feelings he can't ignore and who nearly loses everything to them. This is the story of Kain Highwind. Kain, for those who don't know, is one of the main characters of the game Final Fantasy IV. He was born in the kingdom of Baron as the son of an esteemed dragoon knight, and from a young age seemed all but destined for greatness. However, an unfortunate tragedy takes his father from him, and the king, taking pity on the boy, adopts and raises him alongside two other children named Cecil and Rosa. And from there, the three end up becoming close friends. They all grow up to become important figures in Baron. Rosa becomes a white mage, Cecil a dark knight, and Kain, following in his father's footsteps, becomes a dragoon. Through it all, though, they remain incredibly loyal to both their country and each other, and in the beginning of the game, this relationship makes Kain pretty darn likable. Aside from just sporting a cool design, he's your bro. The sort of person who will be the best man at your wedding, or the godfather to your kid. The kind of friend that would be with you for the rest of your life. Someone who, no matter what, will always have your back. Conversely, though, Kain also doubles as one of the most tragic figures in Final Fantasy IV, and if we're being honest, probably all of classic Final Fantasy. Though, to explain why, I'm going to have to take a second to recap the events of the game and how they relate to Kain. So, if you're someone who's never played the game before, or if you need a refresher, great. If not, please just bear with me for a little bit. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Alright, so, at some point things in Baron change. The king stops acting like the kind old man who raised Cecil and Kain and starts to act a lot more, well, evil. He sends Cecil out to raid other countries for their crystals, and Cecil is understandably pretty confused about the whole thing. Though after seeing his country bomb a town, he kinda gets the idea that maybe Baron isn't entirely on the up and up, and decides he's gonna make some new friends and protect the rest of the crystals. And, spoiler, it doesn't work. Baron's got this guy called Golbez collecting the crystals now, and Kain for some reason is helping him, which leads to some melodrama, but after that, Cecil ends up getting separated from everyone anyway and goes on this pilgrimage to become a paladin, which gives him some pretty rad hair and is honestly a pretty awesome moment. After that, Cecil heads back to Baron, takes down the king, who turns out was just a monster in disguise, and ends up going to Golbez's giant villain lair to try and save his girl Rosa. Which still doesn't go great, granted, but he does manage to save her, and hey, turns out Kain was just being brainwashed the whole time, so now he's on board too. Awesome. Turns out there's a whole second set of crystals underground, so the gang goes down there, and yeah, Golbez already has most of them. But after a couple more failed attempts, Cecil does manage to get one of them, and right about then, Kain gets brainwashed again and swipes the damn thing. So Golbez now has all the crystals, and to figure out what he's planning, Cecil and the gang get a new airship and go to the moon. There they find out Golbez is actually Cecil's brother. He's not really evil, he's just being manipulated by another bad guy. Oh, and by the way, Cecil and Golbez are both descended from moon people. No, I'm not making this up, this is actually the plot of Final Fantasy IV. Anyway, Golbez uses the crystals to restore a giant fantasy mecha, so Cecil and pretty much every character in the story team up to take it down. And they not only manage to pull it off somehow, but they manage to free Kain for real this time. Then everyone runs back to the moon so they can beat up the real bad guy with the power of friendship and level grinding, and hooray, happy ending. Peace is restored,
Friendship
pretty much
and
every
level
country now lives in
grinding. Sounds
harmony.
about right.
Cecil and his friends are all the kings of the different countries. Everyone settles down, Cecil finally marries Rosa, and everyone lives happily ever after. Roll credits. Well, almost everyone. You see, right in the middle of all these
From
celebrations, we
Dark
get
Knight
this
to Paladin,
one
just like
somber
Cecil.
scene
That is
where
true.
we see Kain standing alone in the mountains and staring off into the horizon. While everyone else is off partying and getting married, Kain stands in solitude, quietly vowing to himself that he will never return to Baron, not until he's atoned for what he's done and can face Cecil and Rosa again. And with that, the screen fades to black.
Aw.
compared to all the other characters, Kain's ending feels different. In fact, if you're playing through the game for the first time, you might even be confused by it, because at first you're likely to look at it and go, wait, what? It can almost feel like this moment comes right out of nowhere. Sure, Kain's made some mistakes, he got brainwashed a couple times and acted like kind of a jerk, but that's hardly his fault, right? So why does this game end with him going into self-imposed exile like this? Well, if you pay close enough attention, there are little moments scattered throughout the game that give you glimpses into Kain's thoughts and feelings, and honestly, they start to paint a pretty sad picture about the guy. Here we have Kain, Cecil's best friend and loyal protector of Baron, an incredibly powerful and respected knight, but in the end, a man just like anyone else. A man with his own goals and things precious to him. Things that he can never have because Cecil already does. To kind of show what I'm getting at, I'd like to pose a question. Kain is of course a dragoon, and Cecil, at least initially, is a dark knight. So let me ask you, what exactly does that mean? And I don't mean in a game mechanic sense where we break down the differences in their classes. No, I mean in the context of this universe, what does being a dark knight or a dragoon mean, and what does it say about these two as characters? Well, a Dark Knight is one of, if not the greatest type of knight anyone can aspire to be in Baron. To become a Dark Knight is to show such dedication to your country that you're willing to ruin your own soul with dark power in order to best serve it. It's a position that comes with incredible power and respect, but also something to be feared and pitied. A Dark Knight is someone of such selfless resolve that they're willing to destroy themselves for a cause they believe in. As a Dark Knight, Cecil stands as an ideal for everyone in Baron's army to aspire to, and his loyalty is rewarded by the fact that he was named commander of Baron's airship militia, the Red Wings. And to be fair, a lot of this can also be applied to dragoons as well. Dragoons are also incredibly talented and respected, and it takes a lot of training in order to become one. You need to be able to form a bond with a dragon, master the lance, and train your body to the absolute limits. All well and good, however, they're also considered something of a step down from Dark Knights. In Kain's case, he never became a Dark Knight because he wanted to respect his father's legacy, but because of this, to an extent, he lives in Cecil's shadow. And I honestly can't think of anything more
become the
fitting to
iconic symbol
describe a
of
relationship
dragoon
than that.
armor going forward.
Kain and Cecil
Yeah,
were
I can
both
see
raised by the
that.
same man. They grew up in the same place. They did the same things.
Most
They had a
Ultimate
lot of the same
Spears
goals.
games are simply
But
named
over
King's
time,
Lance.
a gap
I
began to form
see.
between the two. One that just seemed to get wider and wider over time. It was Cecil who became known as Baron's greatest knight. It was Cecil who was given command of the Red Wings. And perhaps saddest of all, it was Cecil that Rosa loved. This understandably put Kain in a pretty difficult position. On the one hand, he's happy for his friends, and he wants to wish them only the best. But on the other, it was yet another thing Cecil had taken from him. And it was this last straw that began to spark intense jealousy within Kain. Why should Cecil be the one to get Rosa when Kain was every bit as good as him? They grew up in the same place and led the same lives. So why does the world seem to continually bend over backwards trying to reward Cecil, while Kain is left on the sidelines? Of course, this isn't fair to Cecil, who by all accounts has done nothing wrong, and nobody realizes this more than Kain does. But he can't help how he feels. Cecil and Rosa are both his best friends, and he should be happy for them. But in the end, he's just not. It's all he can do to force a smile on his face and try to grit his teeth through it. All the while his envy gets worse and worse, soon twisting into a very real, festering hatred for his best friend. And it's this hatred that ultimately is what allowed Golbez to take control of him in the first place, putting Kain's friends and even the whole world in danger, and forcing Kain to acknowledge that ignoring his feelings isn't going to work anymore. He can't just stop his emotions, but if nothing is done, he'll end up hurting someone again. And next time, they might not be so lucky.
Hi.
So Kain does the only
How
thing
you
he feels like
doing?
he can do. He leaves it all behind. He leaves his friends, his country, his status, everything. And he vows to never return until the day when all his personal demons have been conquered and he can look Cecil and Rosa in the eye. If that day will ever come. So Cecil gets his fairy tale ending. He gets to marry the love of his life and become king of the country he loves, all the while his best friend is off alone staring into the horizon. Once again, without meaning to do anything, Cecil had taken everything. 17 years pass. Thanks to what Cecil and his friends managed to accomplish, the world has been living in an unprecedented era of peace.
Good luck with your work.
It's all disrupted one fateful day. The demons of the past have begun to rise once again, and a new evil has appeared, gathering all the crystals. History, it seems, is repeating itself. While all the different parties are scrambling around trying to deal with the crisis, though, something interesting starts to happen. Cecil's son Theodore is rescued from monsters by a mysterious hooded man, a man who says he's looking for Kain. Kain, meanwhile, now having spent almost 20 years in exile, reappears at the heart of all of this. Moreover, he boldly declares that he plans to kill Cecil, to which he starts to gather the crystals himself, kidnaps Rosa, and journeys to Baron in order to kill his best friend while his wife watches. Learning about this, Theodore and the hooded man rush to Baron, and just as Kain is about to enter the throne room, he's stopped, and it's here that the truth finally comes out. The hooded man is Kain, or at least the original, and the man who we thought was Kain all this time was in fact a new creature called Dark Kain. Basically, during his time up in the mountains, Kain stumbled onto the same chamber Cecil used to become a paladin all those years ago, and he was given the same trial. Unlike Cecil though, the darkness within Kain overwhelms him, and he loses, badly. And with nothing to stop him, Dark Kain escapes into the real world, planning to act on the feelings Kain never could. And what's always struck me as really interesting about this is the idea of Dark Kain as a separate character, because despite being called, Dark Kain, and the whole wanting to violently murder Cecil thing, he's a surprisingly compassionate guy. He saves people when they're in danger, he displays an incredible loyalty to both his friends and his country, and he even tells people to start valuing their lives more. Granted, he's kind of gruff about the whole thing, but can you really blame the guy after over a decade in the mountains by himself? By all accounts, he is Kain. The only difference between him and the real thing is that one chooses to suppress their hatred of Cecil, while the other embraces it. He's an existence brought to life by all of Kain's negative emotions, and if Kain isn't willing to act on them, then he will. And it all comes to a head in this final encounter in Baron Castle. With everyone watching, Kain stands as the last line of defense between Dark Kain and Cecil. If he fails now, his best friend will be killed, and this gives Kain the resolve to finally stand his ground. Unlike their first encounter, he manages to match his dark half blow for blow, no longer trying to ignore or run away from his feelings, but instead meeting them head on. And after a long and arduous battle, Kain is victorious. With his other half lying on the ground howling in despair, Kain embraces him, because in the end, despite all that's happened, Dark Kain is still a part of him, a part that he has spent almost 20 years running away from, but no more. His dark side will no longer be what defines him, and in that moment, Kain is reborn.
Oh, wow.
Having conquered his personal demons, Kain stands before everyone as a holy dragoon. He can finally stand triumphantly like he's always wanted. His quest for redemption is finally over.
Aww.
Kain would go on to play an integral role in saving the world with his friends, and after the dust settled, he would go on to take his rightful place at Cecil's side, as both an equal and a friend. Final Fantasy IV The After Years is honestly a pretty flawed game, but I will always call it underrated just because of the way it finally manages to bring Kain's story to a close. This is a man whose life has seemingly been defined by his inability to measure up to his best friend, who allowed himself to be defined by what he wasn't rather than who he was. And yet, in the end, he finally managed to find peace. More than anything else, this game is his story. It's his moment of redemption for his past mistakes, and I don't know. I just always found that pretty moving. For a character from an honestly pretty goofy 16-bit JRPG, Kain's struggle always felt so human. A less well-realized character would have just descended into villainy or hated Cecil, but Kain never did that. There was never a moment when Cecil was anything less than his best friend. He was just a guy torn between what he wanted and who he was. And after 17 years, both in and out of the game, finally getting to see him stand in triumph is a moment that was both a long time coming and something that has just always stuck with me. This story is that of a growing rift between friends. The story of a great man brought down by the feelings he can't control. A story about how he almost loses everything to his inner demons, and how, at the end of it all, despite everything, he can overcome it to stand where he belongs. And that is the story of Kain Highwind.
What? That was... Oh, honestly, that was a cute ending. Happy ending. What?